All right, it looks like we have a number of folks joining us here tonight, so we'll go ahead and get started. We'll do just a couple introductions, and then we'll present an overview of existing conditions, where we are with the Biltmore Avenue Corridor Study. So here with you tonight from VHB study team, I'm Luba Zueva working on this project. We also have Don Bryson and Joe Seymour and Sherry Dawson joining us from VHB team. Also, we have Dan Bechtold here with the City of Asheville joining us today. And he'll also help provide some of the Q&A support. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with a little bit of logistics. So a little bit of an agenda for the presentation tonight. So we'll provide a little bit of an overview of the study purpose in the timeline, and then we'll probably focus the bulk of our presentation on the existing conditions for the corridor so far, and that kind of mirrors what you'll see if you go online and review the existing conditions report, which has been posted to the Corridor Studies website. We'll also review a little bit of a streetlight data analysis. Don will do that as part of our presentation. We will have an interactive poll after the presentation, and then we'll start the Q&A session. So the purpose of the study, looking at Biltmore Avenue and McDowell Street corridors, really is to look at how can we improve active transportation and multimodal transportation conditions along those two corridors. So it's a pretty long stretch, a little over 2 miles. Those corridors connect downtown Asheville with Biltmore Village, and there's a number of important community destinations along those corridors, including Mission Hospital, AB Tech, Asheville High School. And so, again, quite important community destinations, major activity nodes. Along those corridors, there is this desire to improve active transportation conditions and public transportation conditions, but also to improve the safety for all users. At the same time, we have to take into account the fact that both of those roadways are NCDOT maintained, so we have to be subject to NCDOT design guidance. This is not just a City of Asheville decision on how and when some of the corridor design features can be changed. So we'll be taking into account the traffic conditions in addition to multimodal transportation conditions as well. This map just reviews the corridors highlighted in blue. And again, you can see that it's starting with the downtown from Hilliard at the northern end of the study corridors. And then we are stopping at All Souls Crescent in Biltmore Village at the south end. So again, pretty long, crosses a number of neighborhoods, a number of important activity nodes and destinations. Looking at the phases of the project, we started out with the existing plans and conditions review. And so the report that's currently posted on the website includes this existing conditions report. We're also working on land use and market assessment with our partners for the study, Rose and Associates. The market analysis report is not yet published to the website, but will be published probably in the next few months when it's completed. Next, we'll be working on developing future transportation conditions. So we'll be taking a look at the growth rates as projected in the regional travel demand model, and then applying those growth rates to the traffic data that we have today to kind of look at what those intersections will look like in the future, where there'll be particular pain points and congestion bottlenecks along those corridors in the future. And then kind of looking into the winter, early spring, we'll be developing transportation alternatives. We'll be coming back with a second public input meeting in late winter, early spring to start looking at draft recommendations and reviewing those with the public. And then we expect to have the draft final report in late spring. As part of the existing plans review for this study, we have taken a look at some of the plans on the page that have been adopted by local neighborhoods. We've looked at the Asheville Comprehensive Plan, Asheville Transit Master Plan, Asheville in Motion, a number of other locally finished studies and plans as well. And also as part of the existing conditions report, we have been looking at roadway characteristics. So you'll hear from Joe on that in a little bit. Land use has also been taken into account. Also, we've been looking at safety and crash data, transit ridership, and existing bicycle and pedestrian facilities and some of the planned bicycle and pedestrian improvements. Generally, what we are seeing from the existing plans for this area is that a lot of existing plans emphasize this need to improve the multimodal facilities, improve bicycle and pedestrian realm, improve the transit service along this corridor, kind of along the north-south. Looking at the land use and pending developments, again, we are connecting downtown Asheville to Biltmore Village. Um, and there's already a number of different land use types, a lot of kind of mixed use, multifamily residential developments either already existing or coming in along the corridor. There's quite a number of hotels also going in along the corridor. The image below shows that newer hotel that's been under construction along Meadow Road at the intersection with Biltmore. And of course, there's the new hotel districts that are being reviewed by the city council. So that might impact some of the hotels development in the future, but for now we are still seeing a lot of that type of development, both multifamily residential, mixed use, and hotels coming in. And then of course the hospital has been seeing some construction, but for the most part for now that construction is complete. There's also affordable housing changes happening along the corridor as well, with Lee Walker Heights being redeveloped. Looking at the demographic data for the study area, about a quarter-mile buffer from Biltmore and McDowell, the study team has found so far that there's quite a bit of diversity in the population immediately surrounding the study corridors. So in terms of racial diversity, definitely the local population is more diverse than the city of Asheville or Buncombe County population overall. So you're seeing a higher percentage of African American people residing in the study area as compared to the city of Asheville. Also, you're seeing a higher percentage of population in poverty when you look at the study area. So households that might be it might be difficult for them financially to afford multiple vehicles. And as a result, we also see that reflected in the household vehicle availability data. That also shows that for the study area, we are seeing that a higher percentage of households have either zero vehicles or only one vehicle available as compared to the city of Asheville overall or Buncombe County overall. So that again points to the importance of improving active transportation and public transit service along those corridors to make sure the population that lives nearby can find access to jobs, to schools, and basic community resources. So looking at the transit ridership, we wanted to make sure that we took a look both before and post-COVID conditions. So we took a look at the October 2019 ridership data first, and you can kind of see the ridership, both people getting on and off the bus symbolized with those blue circles. Biltmore Avenue was seeing slightly higher ridership on an everyday basis as compared with McDowell. That's probably not surprising. So again, October 2019, all the routes were operating on normal schedule. And then we looked at the April 2020 transit ridership data. At that point, Route S6 stopped functioning as of April 4th for a while. It was brought back later. So you can see that McDowell does not see any transit ridership as of April, but Biltmore transit ridership remained relatively strong, at least in some places, probably not as strong down in Biltmore Village. And then we looked at June 2020 ridership data, at which point Route S6 was back in service. So you can kind of see that the transit ridership is starting to come back to normal conditions, still slightly lower than it was before in October of 2019. And then we also took a look at the safety and crash data. So one thing that really jumps out at us is Biltmore Avenue, looking especially at the last 5 years of data, is seeing higher than statewide average crash rates. So that is definitely an area for concern. And some of that has to do with narrow lanes, people probably traveling a little bit too fast. And Joe is going to review some of those geometric conditions with you in a minute. But for Biltmore Avenue, especially, we are seeing the side swipe crashes percentage that's really high, higher than we would typically expect to see it. So in addition to left turn, rear end collisions, again, you're seeing some of those side swipe crashes. Biltmore Avenue also saw one fatality over the last 5 years at Doctors Drive and 9 pedestrian crashes, no bicyclist crashes just in the immediate last 5 years. Looking at McDowell, it's about on par with statewide average for the frequency of crashes. 2 pedestrian crashes in the immediate last 5 years. No fatalities in the immediate 5 years. So again, not necessarily great crash rates for McDowell, but just not worse than statewide average. So about on par where we'd expect it to be. There's definitely, from talking to the stakeholders so far, there's definitely some concern with pedestrian crossing safety around Asheville High School especially. Looking at bicycle and pedestrian crashes in more detail, the map highlights some of the fatalities and serious injury crashes in the table as well. So there was of concern a serious injury pedestrian crash that occurred at on McDowell at Grindstaff Drive in 2009. That is a crossing right outside of Asheville High School, so that's been noted by the school as well that that's a problematic potential concern area. Also, we saw a pedestrian fatality at Biltmore Avenue at Short Cox Avenue in 2014. Now, something to note is that the City of Asheville does have a project, a Greenway Connector project that's currently going through design. It is expected that that project, when implemented, would actually improve that pedestrian crossing at Biltmore Avenue and Short Cox. And then there were a couple other serious injury crashes recorded in the last 11 years. So this is a slightly longer period than the immediate 5 years that we reviewed for vehicular crashes. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe to review the roadway conditions, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Luba. So I'm going to transition now into the existing traffic conditions, and we're going to look at first at performance of intersections, vehicle volumes, and then look at the geometry and some of their characteristics of the roadway. So first, we're going to look at the existing traffic conditions. So we did a number of things to evaluate intersection and roadway performance. We obtained intersection peak hour volume data from various sources, from historic counts, from traffic forecasts, as well as traffic impact analyses are done for often done for the establishment of a new facility, business, what have you. We did apply a growth rate to adjust volumes to 2020 conditions from our known counts in 2018. We also conducted 6 new counts at locations where we didn't have turning movement data. And we balanced these counts in order to have a better understanding of how COVID is affecting travel. And we also incorporated AM and PM timing plans from the city into our intersection performance analysis. So let's look at, we're going to look at first the northern portion of the corridor and then the southern portion of the corridor for the performance of intersections. So first, one thing to note is that volumes are higher in the northern portion of the corridor towards the center than towards the medical campus. In the north towards Hilliard, we're about 12,000 vehicles a day on Ashland and McDowell, and about 10,000 vehicles per day over on Biltmore. We've seen a small increase in that annual average of daily traffic over on Biltmore over the last 10 years. And then when we look south towards the corridor, down towards the medical campus, we still have about 12,000 vehicles along McDowell. And we have an even higher level, 17,000 vehicles per day over on Biltmore. Now, both of these have slightly declined by about 1% over the last few years. One of the things we note here is that in terms of the AM and PM peaks of the morning rush and the evening rush, we look at the performance of the intersections. That's what we're looking at now. Our signalized intersections are identified by our triangles, and our unsignalized or our stop controlled intersections, a stop sign on the side street, are identified by the octagon there. For the most part, operations our signals are performing well. So good level of service A. One thing to note is that we do have poor operations at Biltmore and Hilliard in the afternoon or the PM peak, and that's undergoing future retiming. Now, one thing we want to note is that there's a lot of demand for travel east-west through that intersection at Hilliard and Biltmore. Otherwise, most of the intersections you can see here, green, blue, yellow, they're performing fairly well. So let's now look at the southern portion of the corridor. Here, the highest volumes are going to be in the southern part of the corridor near the Biltmore Village, but here volumes are higher than the north. They're about 20,000 over on McDowell and 17,500 over on Biltmore. We've seen a small decrease over the last 10 years on McDowell and a small increase over on Biltmore. While we look down to the south, again, this is where our highest daily volumes are, about 23,000 vehicles along McDowell and 18,000 vehicles along Biltmore. And same, a small decrease along McDowell, a small increase along Biltmore. Now, in terms of the performance of the intersections, as you'll see here again, signalized intersections are identified with the triangle, where unsignalized or stop controlled are identified by the octagon. Is that we have poor operations in the AM and PM peaks, so the morning rush and the evening rush down to the southern portion of the corridor. A number of those intersections are failing, so level of service D, E, or F. This is due in part to long signal lengths, primarily in the PM hour, as well as at some of our unsignalized intersections there at Thompson Road. You're seeing there's a black octagon there. It's stop controlled, and it's very difficult to turn out of those, particularly left if you're trying to go south during some of these high volume hours in the AM or PM peak. In addition to some of the issues related with the rail traffic and the at-grade crossing at that location. But generally, conditions are acceptable north of Bryson Street in this portion of the corridor, but we're going to be looking at those signalized intersections in the southern part of the corridor. Next, I want to look at the roadway design elements, and these are more of the characteristics of the roadway. So, you know, how we break these up into manageable chunks because we are dealing with several miles of roadway and an east and west section. So what we've done is we've segmented the corridor into east and west in segments 1, 2, 3, 4, north to south. You'll see these here with breaks at South Side, Hospital Drive, and Bryson Street. So the things we look at in existing conditions report for our roadway design elements include, you know, length of the roadway, the width, and the cross section. So how many lanes, and is there a center turn lane? The posted speed limit, horizontal and vertical alignment. So is there a downward slope, upward slope? How much is a shift horizontally, as well as the number of signalized intersections versus stop controlled. Also, the types of physical constraints we see, whether they be retaining walls or embankments, because those can affect or limit in a way what types of improvements we're able to recommend, and given those cost considerations. We also look at bicycle and pedestrian facilities and transit amenities that are present, such as shelters and benches, what's at those stops. We also look at the quality and the quantity of bridges and tunnels, and we have ratings that are identified in our report. And we describe the vehicle volumes, the growth rate, and directionality. And those are things I just talked about. So I won't be talking about those last things going forward. So let's start in the north in segment 1. And we're going to be looking at Ashland McDowell and then Biltmore. So in segment 1, we're looking at Hilliard to Southside Ave. In terms of our cross section, it's a 4-lane undivided cross section with posted 35 miles an hour. We have one signalized intersection, one stop controlled. We do have a downward slope of 4.5% over this segment. We do have some limited curves horizontally. There are sidewalks on both sides and bicycle lanes on street, painted lanes. Now, a special consideration here, when we're proceeding from Patton down south to this section, we're going from a 2-lane undivided to a 4-lane undivided. So we do shift cross section there. Now over on the eastern side of the corridor of Biltmore, same thing. We have a 4-lane undivided cross section, posted 35. We do have the same number of signalized and and stop control intersections. We do have a similar downward slope, but not as steep. We also have limited horizontal curves. We do have sidewalks on both sides, no bicycle facilities. And we also transition this time from an imbalanced 2-lane, 1-lane roadway to a 4-lane to a balanced 2 lanes each direction cross section. Now here are some images of segment 1, looking at South Slope and some of the commercial, the breweries like where I'm located right now. We also see over on Lexington Ave some of the mixed use and multifamily new facilities going in. And in your bottom left and right, we see some of the roadway cross sections and some of those slopes. In your bottom right, we're actually showing the Southside Ave intersection where there have been recent pedestrian upgrades that we've noted in our existing conditions report. So as we move south to segment 2, beginning at Southside and going down to Hospital Drive along McDowell Street, We've transitioned from a 4-lane undivided to a 5-lane cross section. So with a center 2-way left turn lane, posted 35 miles an hour. We have two signalized intersections and one stop controlled. We've gone from a downward slope to an upward slope, and this is a straight section of the corridor. We do have sidewalk on both sides, but we do have a sidewalk gap. There are no bicycle facilities in this segment anymore, and we do have retaining walls and embankments along the corridor, along with frequent driveways. Conversely, on Biltmore, we still have a 4-lane undivided roadway, posted 35. We have a higher frequency of signalized and stop control intersections. We do see an incline as well, and we have frequent curves, horizontal shifts in this segment. We do have sidewalks on both sides and a warning signage indicating bicycles share the roadway. And here we do have a grade separated crossing near the hospital complex. So here on the left, you can see the 5-lane cross section, the center 2-way left turn lane and that slope, as well as on the right, you can see the 4-lane undivided cross section with the slope as well. And you can see sidewalk facilities in both images. One thing we do note in the existing conditions report, there are frequent encroachments from things like utility poles into the sidewalk, even reducing their usable width. Next, we go to segment 3 from Hospital Drive to Meadow Road. So we're approaching the bridge to the south. Along McDowell, we shift back to a 4-lane undivided roadway, still posted 35, 3 signalized and 3 stop control intersections. We're now downward slope again, and we do have some horizontal curves. Again, we have sidewalks on both sides with gaps. We do have an uncontrolled crossing at the Asheville High School. It is signed, but there are safety issues there, as Luba noted. And we also have a tunnel with a narrow sidewalk going through, as well as a school zone at the Asheville High School. Over on Biltmore, same cross section, same posted speed, a higher frequency of driveways and signalized and stop controlled intersections, an even greater slope and frequent horizontal curves. Sidewalks on both sides, no marked no posted bicycle facilities, but do have warning signage. And we have a number of grade separated crossings at the medical complex. So over here on your left with McDowell, you can see the 4-lane cross section, frequent driveways. In the bottom left, there's Asheville High School. We're not showing the crossing there, but if you're familiar with the corridor, you've seen it. Over on the right, we've got one of the grade separated crossings at the hospital complex. And down to the lower right, we're kind of previewing our next segment, which is down towards the Biltmore Village. And finally, looking at Meadow Road to All Souls Crescent, we shift back to a 5-lane cross section, posted 35, 2 signalized and 2 stop control intersections. At this point, it's a minor incline once we've crossed the bridge, limited curves. We do have sidewalks again, but we also have gaps down towards the Biltmore Village. And one of the considerations we're facing is the bridge and the constraint there. Also over on Biltmore, we have the same cross section as before, 4-lane divided, but our speed has dropped down to posted 20 to account for that. We're approaching more of a commercial corridor with more pedestrian activity. Again, we have a high frequency of signalized and stop controlled intersections along Biltmore Avenue, similar to what we've seen in other portions of the corridor north. We have a minor incline, it's generally straight. We do have sidewalks on both sides, but we do have some gaps, notably near the rail crossing. We have an uncontrolled pedestrian crossing along Biltmore, and when we get down south into more of the commercial area. And we have issues of the 4-lane bridge, as well as a railroad crossing. Now here are some images from the corridor. In the upper left, you can see the uncontrolled crossing there along Biltmore. And then here are just various images of the railroad crossing, as well as the bridge and some of the gaps in the pedestrian network as we get down to the southern portion of the corridor. All right, thank you, Luba. Now I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Don.
I'm going to go through a different type of analysis we did. It's kind of gets underneath some of the data Joe is sharing with you. This is streetlight analysis, which is an aggregation of basically anonymized cell phone data. That when you download those apps onto your cell phone and you click accept, you're also accepting the use of the tracking of the cell phone, and it gets anonymized and collected and gathered. Streetlight packages this and we analyze it, it gets about 20 to 25% of the traffic on this road. We're looking at pre-COVID 2019, and we're only looking at vehicle travel, people in cars, not transit, not pedestrian or bicycle. And the purpose for doing this is we want to see where people are going to and from, not just the volumes of traffic. So this is going to help a lot in the next step of this process of figuring out some alternatives and what happens if we change things around. We have a lot of good traffic counts in this area, so we're able to expand that 25% sample and get a pretty accurate depiction of the traffic flows. We can also look at things at any month of the year. Historically, we can look at different days of the week, different times a day, which is real useful in this quarter, as we'll see some interesting things that we learned. We identified a number of zones and the trips associated with them was, as the first part. This is the downtown area, about 74,000 trips a day in the corridor study area. South Slope, the hospital, Asheville High School, AB Tech, Biltmore Village, and then we also separately we did a little look at Biltmore Estate. One of the things we can do is then see where these trips begin and end within a 1 kilometer square grid. So each one of these squares is a 1 kilometer, and that's part of the anonymization is personal identity. We don't want to get too detailed on these locations, but this is just generally a heat map that showed for trips going to Biltmore Village on a typical day, kind of where they're coming from. You can see that the red ones are high. This is Biltmore Village, so you can see it's generally close in, but you've got things going up this sort of corridor up into North Asheville, down into Biltmore Forest and south. We can compare that to Mission Hospital, which has a much wider distribution, and we can also see that the trips going to Biltmore Hospital are coming from a much longer distance, different times a day. And we kind of combined all these. We can look at them separately or all together, but what we found in combining them is this sort of a pattern of this north-south corridor, fairly tight in, and then also a little bit of another West Asheville market. We like to talk to these in terms of travel markets and try to decide, some of these that are very close in, do they need to be automobile trips? Could they be bike, ped, or transit? And if they're not, why not? What can we do to change that? We also used streetlight data, and fortunately in another study looking at regional commuter transit potential we did last year. And we happened to pick this same area, the same corridor and downtown as major attractors. And we looked at where trips were coming from based on census block groups. So you can see this is the area around Biltmore Hospital and the AB Tech and Biltmore Village. And then the white areas are more commuters, and as it gets darker is fewer, and then this is overlaid with the transit line. So again, it starts to suggest that north-south demand on a more regional basis, and then a little bit of the east-west. Another thing we can look at is, turned out to be pretty interesting, is the individual activity at each of these zones. For example, here's Mission Hospital has the most trips. That we didn't look at downtown in this case because that kind of much larger and kind of skewed the results. But we got this 8 a.m. peak of, as you'd expect, shifts coming in, a little peak at lunchtime, and then a 5 p.m. peak. Compared that to South Slope and Biltmore Village, the gray and the orange, they don't have much of a morning peak, and kind of this extended, lunchtime and evening peaks, which is kind of what you'd expect. Similar volumes. AB Tech, more of a morning that trickles off throughout the day. And then, as you'd expect with the high school, 2 major peaks, not much else at other times. If we combine all these together, we can start to see how these build and contribute this 9 a.m. peak, the 1 p.m. peak, plateau, 4 p.m., and trickling down. Because of the nature of this corridor, we also looked at the weekend trip. And we can see, there's very little school activity. There's a lot more proportionally of the South Slope and Biltmore Village throughout, afternoon into evening. There's a little bit less with Mission Hospital. What's kind of interesting about this pattern we're seeing, though, is it's actually pretty similar to the weekday COVID type of pattern that we're seeing, with fewer people going into school, more people working from home, and we see the same kind of shift where the morning peak drops down and then gets filled in more in the afternoon, so that this whole long peak kind of fills in, which is kind of interesting, and be interesting to see how that continues. We're also able to look at the trip length cumulatively and for each of these activity zones we identified. And what's interesting here is you can see for Mission Hospital and AB Tech, about 40% of the trips are less than 5 miles. You can see this 2 to 5 mile. You have a lot of 10 to 20, 20 to 30 mile. Mission Hospital, very similar pattern. But Biltmore Village, South Slope, some of the others have about 60% of the trips are 2 to 5 miles. So much shorter average trip length, and quite a few 2 to 5 mile, 1 to 2 mile trips, things that look like they could be very high potential for transit or bike ped trips. The other things we were able to look at here is looking very specifically at the routes and the through trips. So if we looked at all the traffic here getting off the interstate heading north, this could be in both directions, but just for ease, I'm going to talk about heading north. Pretty even split between traffic going on Biltmore or McDowell. This again is just looking at what's going entirely through the corridor. On Biltmore, a lot of it ends up here on Swannanoa, Bryson, Meadow. But what was interesting is it's a very different bi-direction. They go by one route and come back by another route. So that gets to be important when we start looking at alternatives. But a lot of the through trips are up here, Lexington, Charlotte Street on the northeast, not many over on the west, but there are quite a bit ending up down here by the river. McDowell, on the other hand, you'll see this large 22% coming up here on Ashland, and some smaller amounts, which is kind of what you'd expect. If we look at internal, external distribution, that's the same trips coming in. You'll see Biltmore and McDowell split about evenly, but far more accessing Mission Hospital use Biltmore. AB Tech and the high school obviously use McDowell, and it's pretty even up here up downtown and South Slope. But that starts to tell us which trips we can shift, which we can't. What is it about Biltmore that's more attractive? Is it the way the guide signs are set up, or the parking works, things like that? So we'll be looking at all those interactions. One thing we could also look at was just at the bridge. We said, here's all the trips using McDowell Bridge right here. We can see this was kind of interesting and a little bit unexpected. We see the large proportion are on Ashland, north of south side, but here is the proportion that are of those that are going downtown and South Slope. So it's really, there's a lot of trips on here that aren't going downtown. They're going to other areas north and west, which is a little bit more than we expected. We kind of thought these folks would be going downtown. So we need to look at that a little more. It's good to have that understanding of kind of where these trips are going. If we switch it to look at the Biltmore Bridge over the Swannanoa, we'll see much more of these are not through trips. They're going to Mission Hospital. They're going to up in Biltmore, north of south side. They're going downtown. They're going to South Slope, and a lot of them actually going down on the Swannanoa River and Meadow also. So we see these different patterns, and that's something we can start to understand and shape and test our alternatives. Looking specifically at the hospital, trips leaving the hospital, overwhelmingly, they're taking Biltmore, pretty evenly split to the north, about 42% north, but more heading south on Biltmore. So that's important to understand. As they leave the area, we find the major exit points are heading down Hendersonville Road, over here to the south and east, and a few up on Ashland, but the rest of it is pretty evenly spread around. So again, that's another option for us to try to shift trips around and understand where we can have an impact. Well, I'll turn it over to Luba now to kind of wrap things up, but we will be using a lot more of this information, as I said, in developing alternatives in the next phase of the process.
Thank you, Don. Next, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to see where you can go to get a little bit more information for the study. So the City of Asheville now has a website dedicated to corridor studies. There's several other corridor studies going on. So if you go to transportation current projects corridor studies, that's where the existing conditions report is currently posted, as well as an interactive map for the study. And as we start to develop recommendations, we'll be able to use this platform of online interactive map to highlight some of the potential improvements. We are planning an online survey, but it's not currently opened yet. We expect it'll be open for a little while, probably about a month and a half. So stay tuned, go back and check on the website in about a week. Maybe we're hoping that the survey will be open soon. And as already mentioned, we expect that another community workshop will be planned for late winter, early spring, at which point there'll be another opportunity for public feedback. So with that, for now, first of all, I wanted to bring up, I guess, the contact info for Dan and I. If you had some specific burning questions or comments, you're welcome to submit them to me and Dan as we're starting this study process. We're still pretty early on in the process. Thank you all so much today for joining us and participating in our first public meeting. Again, we'll be posting the webinar, the survey soon, so stay tuned and please participate in the survey. And then if you email us, we'll be happy to put you on the mailing list to provide updates about the next steps in the study.